The Holy Gospel according to St. John, the first chapter. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. This is the testimony given by John when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" He confessed and did not deny it, but confessed, "I am not the Messiah." And they asked him, "What then? Are you Elijah?" He said, "I am not." "Are you the prophet?" He answered, "No." Then they said to him, "Who are you? Let us have an answer for those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?" He said, "I am the voice of one crying out in the wilderness, 'Make straight the way of the Lord,' as the prophet Isaiah said." Now they had been sent from the Pharisees. They asked him, "Why then are you baptizing, if you are neither the Messiah, nor Elijah, nor the prophet?" John answered them, "I baptize with water. Among you stands one whom you do not know, the one who is coming after me. I am not worthy to untie the thong of his sandal." This took place in Bethany, across the Jordan, where John was baptizing. The Gospel of the Lord.
In today's gospel lesson, John the Baptist uses a curious turn of phrase. He begins by saying, "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord," as the prophet Isaiah said. "I baptize with water." And then he says, "Among you stands one whom you do not know." Jesus, the stranger. You know, that theme stuck with him all of his earthly life. At his birth, he came as a peasant's baby, utterly unknown and only honored by a few. And later on, there were fleeting moments of recognition, once by the same John the Baptist when Jesus came to be baptized, once by Peter, who said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Of course, this is the same Peter that later denied even knowing him. Maybe now and then by the Pharisees, who hated Jesus precisely because they did for an instant sense who he was. Of course, there's the Roman centurion at the foot of the cross who recognized Jesus and said, "Truly, this was the Son of God." You know, fleeting moments, but otherwise, for the most part, no one really knew him. His life was that of an unknown alien. Even his own parents were bewildered by him. You know, you remember that time when Jesus was a boy, he wandered off to the temple to the dismay of his parents who didn't know where he was. And when they find him, Jesus says to them, "Do you not know that I must be about my Father's business?" And even then one gets a sense that they don't really understand who their son really was. Jesus' own disciples mistook him for a ghost one day as he came walking to them on the water. Even this John, who says in our gospel lesson, "Among you stands one whom you do not know," before he was executed, beheaded, he sent messengers to Jesus asking if Jesus really was the Messiah, or should they be looking for another? Of course, after the resurrection, Jesus wasn't recognized. Mary Magdalene thought he was the gardener. The disciples on the road to Emmaus didn't know him, even as he walked with them until he broke the bread in their midst. You see, from the beginning to the end, the gospel is the story of this stranger on earth. Even now, he's a stranger to our familiar assumptions, alien to our cherished prejudices, foreign to our insulations from the anguish of the world, an unwelcome intruder into our lingering notions that we can somehow transform human existence by ourselves through things like science, government programs, genetic engineering, or free public education, or group dynamics, or positive thinking, the latest developments in artificial intelligence, or whichever fad of self-improvement is available at the time. Perhaps we need to look more carefully at the occasional greeting card that portrays a Japanese Jesus or an Eskimo Christ. Maybe it would help if in churches that are predominantly white, we put a black baby doll in the manger, or if in the pageant we portray Mary and Joseph as Native Americans, the shepherds as Argentine cowboys, and the three kings as Russian politicians. At least it might remind us that the child is not someone familiar. He's different. He's very different. He is the stranger in our midst. A contemporary writer gives us this illustration. We are closer to the truth if we recognize God's sheer vulgarity. The vulgarity of a God who created human beings with the freedom to reject God. The vulgarity of a God who splashes the sunset with colors that no decent painter would ever put side by side. The vulgarity of a God who won't stay in heaven but gets down in the muck of the world. The vulgarity of a God who was born in a cave among cattle and died on a gallows between crooks. Too commonly, we create for ourselves a familiar Jesus, a prettied up Jesus, a sweet and tame and prim and proper Jesus, and when that happens, we do not know the one who stands among us. Then we miss the social explosion that he caused, going about eating dinner with prostitutes and traitors, holding up God's favorites, as God's favorites, those whom society had rejected. He was strange to the people of his time. Strange. And at first, the common people heard him gladly because he was so strange, a novelty in their drab lives. But in the end, he was too much for them, too strange, too different, and they had to do something about it. And we know what they did. The cross was what they did. Do we really know the Lord of Advent, the one who comes this Christmas? Not unless we recognize him as the stranger. That is the reason for the manger, the star, the angels, the shepherds, and the magi. They are not meant to decorate the familiar, but to proclaim the mystery of the unpredictable one, the God whom we cannot control or pin down or box up or wrap up. When you and I are in the presence of the mysterious Son of God, that mystery becomes more mysterious. God does not shrink when we get to know God. God expands. God does not become smaller. God becomes bigger. This Christmas brings with it the fatigue of a world, a post-pandemic world where in order to experience the joys and beauty of life, we have to work extra hard. In order to overcome the anxiety we know these days as human beings, we have to resist the urge to give in, or worse, to give up. And yet none of this, nothing in our world, nothing in our own personal lives has the ability to stop Christmas from coming. But all of it can, if we allow it to, cause us to see the Christ of Christmas in a very different way. You know, maybe we think we know the baby in the manger, and maybe we've decided already that this year's Christmas will just be like any other. Because after decades of Christmases, well, there really isn't anything new. But could there be? You know, I think the answer to that question correlates directly with how much you need this year's Christmas to bring to you something it has never brought to you before. How deep is your longing? How desperate your soul? How weary is your spirit? Because if we cannot bring our full selves, our full humanity, our truest reality to these moments, then Christmas will have no chance to be anything different than it has been in the past. How many of you ever asked, as I did, for Santa to bring me a shiny red bike? Maybe yours was a different color, maybe it was a different object, but it was that one thing that you knew you had to have in order for that Christmas to be a good one. Well, did you get it? And can you remember what it felt like to receive the very desire of your heart, to get what you really, really wanted? Have you forgotten what it is to really, really want something? Has life so disappointed you that you don't even bother to ask anymore? I mean, what's the use, right? Maybe you even stopped wanting anything. That way at least you aren't ever disappointed. Well, maybe it's time to awaken the child within you, to discover again that one thing, that one hope, that one dream, that deep and holy longing, that shiny red bicycle that you would like to ask God to bring you this Christmas. After all, Santa brought me the shiny red bike. I can only hope that God is as generous as Santa. God might just surprise me. So this Christmas, the invitation is to meet the God who is bigger than you could ever know. The God, the Jesus who is mystery himself, the one whom you do not know. Amen.